So once again, I am excited because today I am joined by two wonderful colleagues, Alosa and we've got Hannah from Impact North. Guys, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourselves and just introduce yourself? The subject today is attachment and the role it might play in settings like school, for instance. So we're going to talk all about attachment today. I'm Natalie. I'm from Noah's Ark. I'm the Young Person's Counseling Coordinator there. I work with young people, families, adults, and so forth, and do a lot of supporting the counsellors as well. So Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you work and the sort of role you play, and Alosa?
Yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm an psychotherapist, and I work with an organisation called Impact North, who are based in Leeds, but are working sort of more broadly across West Yorkshire, and really pleased to be forming a relationship with Noah's Ark for a pilot project that we're running in Halifax at the moment.
Oh, Hannah, and thank you so much for giving your time today. We're so glad to have you with us. Thank you so much for that. It's wonderful to have you here and such a wealth of experience. Yes, Alosa, tell us about you.
Yeah, so I'm Therapeutic Services Manager at Noah's Ark, and I'm a relational therapist, work with children, young people and adults. So I love this topic of attachment as well. It's so broad, and there's just so much to it. I think
Yes.
I'm going to enjoy the discussion today.
Yes. I'm glad you said. I'm also excited because it's one of my favorite subjects to get into. And I don't think we're going to have enough time. We've got less than an hour, but we'll try to cover the basics and just lay a bit of a foundation. We can always do a follow-up, at some point, so it's not a problem. So when we say attachment, what do we mean by this word attachment? Such an interesting word. I mean, we throw it about. We say, oh, are they securely attached, or and all this. But what do we mean by that? Could you lay it out for us a bit, Hannah and Alosa?
I'll let you go first, Hannah.
As we began our conversation today, we were talking about how when we talk about attachment as if it could be like a specific an idea, quite a few bullet points of something, and really it's like a massive it's a theory of human development. It originated in a guy called John Bowlby, who was a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, started researching in the late 1940s in London, and looking at how his ideas led to a profound shift from the idea of a kind of drives-based theory of human interaction. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I want to procreate, a very sort of transactional, maybe that's the wrong word, view of having your needs met, to an idea that really we're constantly seeking a relationship with each other. So it's a theory of human relationships.
I love that. A theory of human relationships. It sounds like relationship is very key to attachment. Alosa, how do you understand attachment? What do you think of when we say attachment? What comes to your mind?
Yeah, definitely about that relationships, how we work in relationship, and how we try to get our needs kind of met through relationships. So we think about, like Hannah was saying, those basic needs. We have certain survival needs that help us to keep living those basic things, but we also have relational needs that sustain us and make life, I guess, much more enjoyable and much more like feeling like you want to be alive if you've got your relational needs being met, and those can only be met in relationships. So I think a lot of things for us are learnt, felt painful, felt joyful. All of these things happen in relationship, and I guess that's why at the moment, as we're recording this, it's very difficult, because all those relationships for people have often, they've been cut short, or they've been made to function in some other way, and it just really highlighted how much relationship is important for us as human beings. And so that attachment element, I think it's that, well, how do we attach to other people in order that we get some of these needs met? And people do that in lots of different ways, that they try to get those needs met, or they've learnt to get them met, and maybe sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not so helpful always, as times change for them, as their life kind of progresses.
But I'm hearing that it's very adaptive, and people are doing the best they can to get their needs met. The other thing I was just thinking as you were talking, you guys, and I was thinking, what makes for a secure attachment? What are the protective factors that help to build that safe base, to build that secure attachment? Yeah, and how can we as professionals, how can we as teachers, how can we as parents help? Any ideas? Hannah, do you want to lay that out a bit for us?
So we're born, we're babies, we are, look to the world around us, and at that point, when we talk about getting our needs met, that is, it's immediate, it's vital. You need to be not just fed and changed and what have you, but you need a caregiver who's going to pick up on those little micro signals that you're giving, who's going to tell you that the world is a place that responds to me. The world is a place that I can cry, and someone is going to come and have a think about what that communicates. And so, from a kind of developmentally formative situation, we're dependent on relationships. As a species, we're dependent on relationships. But that's not to say that it's a kind of infantile need that we grow out of. And Bowlby certainly, sort of state to claim that throughout life, we do best when we are coming and going from a sense of relational security. So if we think about, I'm giving a very scrambled kind of history of attachment theory here. But when you talk about the different styles of attachment, I understand you're referring to Mary Ainsworth's Strange Situation.
Yes, that was a really good study. If you guys want to watch it, it's on YouTube. It's brilliant, isn't it?
I mean, it's that was a really big moment in the sort of development of what we now think of as attachment theory.
Sure.
It was this experiment in the 1970s where infants, like 18-month-old infants, were came into a room with their primary caregiver. They then were kind of left to play, to explore the room for a little bit, and at various intervals their primary caregiver maybe left the room for a bit, or a stranger came into the room for a little bit. And I think we can kind of imagine how that might look in terms of we say like a secure base, but I think we can, without any kind of prior understanding of psychology, imagine that, if you bring your little one into the room with you, whether or not they then feel safe to kind of go off to explore, to say to their parent, oh, I'm doing this, to show their parent I'm doing this, whether they are a bit kind of, oh, I'm in a new environment, they kind of get close to us, or whether they go into a kind of, or whether they storm off like, who are you? I don't, I'm fine. And equally, I think we can imagine when a kind of stranger comes into the room in those situations, how they respond to that. Do they feel, do they go up to the stranger? If the stranger engages them, how do they respond to that? Are they checking in with their primary caregiver? Is this person a safe person? So all of these things are giving us clues about what that child has learned the world is like. Have they learnt the world is full of people who are going to be interested to meet me? Or have they learnt that the world is full of people who could be a little bit unpredictable, you might want to be a little bit wary of? So this is, from the first I was going to say from the first time the baby opens their eyes, but we know now that actually a lot is happening in utero. So from the beginning of life, we're constantly in this loop of picking up cues from our environment. And we use this to build a kind of template from the worlds that what in attachment theory would be called an internal working model. We're building a roadmap for what can I expect of the world, and also for how do I see myself? Because that's a massive part of it, is how does the world treat me, and how does that influence how I perceive myself in the world?
That is so good, Hannah. Thank you. You've just laid it out so beautifully. And it's so true, isn't it? That first kind of, whether they have a sensitive caregiver, whether someone who's attuned to their needs, they're building this, like you say, roadmap, this schema, this script, even life script possibly. But I think there's something quite important about just clarifying, because I can just imagine their parents like they're thinking, oh my gosh, when my child was young and my child was very sick and we were separated in hospital, or they had to have operations as a baby, and oh my gosh, does that mean my child now is set in stone, as the beginning was very painful, or maybe for whatever reason. It's not always that the parents that with the best will in the world and intention. But is there hope? I mean, I know our brains are very there's plasticity, isn't there? I mean, what if a child has had a bad or problematic or challenging start, and maybe hasn't experienced some of those lovely, securely attached, sensitive, care, back and forth, kind of mirroring and so on, attunement, for whatever reason, how can is there hope later on? And what can we do later on for these kids? Let's say they're 6 or 7 going to school, or even high school teenagers who have had a bad start. Well, I can just imagine all these questions firing out there. What do you guys think? Is there hope?
I think there's definitely hope, and I think that's why we're sort of in the profession that we're in, really, because there's and even for staff at school and the interactions they have, and interactions kids have everywhere, from dinner ladies to sports clubs that they're in. All sorts of interactions can provide that sense of getting their needs met in a healthy, secure kind of manner. And I think, like you said, Natalie, the brain is it's that plasticity. It's ever developing, so it's always that internal working model, that schema, that you might say, that roadmap for certain, like you might have a schema for certain kinds of relationship, and that's ever changing and can never be formed and through experience. So it's like the argument about nature and nurture, isn't it? Nurture plays is not just how we're born or what we're born into exactly. It's how the experiences we have over time can really help shape our sense of self and who we are, and that build that confidence and build that ability to feel like that they can learn, or that the world is a safer place, even if it wasn't such a safe place before. I think, going back to like what Hannah was saying before, it's so broad, so we might say these certain kind of styles of how a child might react, say, in that Ainsworth experiment, and maybe they're in this style or that style, but it's ever changing, and people might have different ways of reacting to different people in their life that they've developed relationships with. They might have a secure attachment with one person and something that's a little bit more anxious with somebody else in their family, and it's all very varied in that aspect. I think something I was thinking of as well, just to point out, is that sometimes these things can be quite hidden. So there's some of them are quite glaring, like, oh, somebody's really avoiding this situation. There's an avoidance going on here, or there's a lot of disorganization going on here. But often it's the quiet ones. And I know that since like that Mary Ainsworth experiment, they've done some neurological things, haven't they? Testing of what's going on with the cortisol in children when they're going into those situations. And often it's the quiet ones who look like they're not worried at all, who maybe plod into school quite nicely, or There's no major behavioural issues going on in school. There's no kind of outside sort of things that we can see, but actually inside they may be really, really struggling, really anxious, really. But the way they've learned to get their needs met is to keep it inside. That's maybe how, you know, they've learned to get some of their other relational needs met, is that they're better off keeping things inside and not letting it spill out to the other relationships in their family. And they're the ones, I think, sometimes at school, for instance, it might be, you know, when they do speak out, or when it reaches that edge where they do kind of, you know, is to really take heed of that and not just think, oh, they've been fine and everything's always been fine for them. Yeah.
I think that is so true, Alo. So, you know, I'm just thinking about, you know, kids that are very avoidant. They can become super independent, can't they? They're just like, I don't need anyone. And it's easy for us to assume that they're okay and they're fine and they're doing, you know, they're very task orientated. Maybe they do really well in sport, whatever. They might not have a lot of friendships, but you think, oh, well, they've got enough to get by, you know. I think that's so true. And we've got to be so careful and sensitive, not to assume things, but to really ask. And they don't like to ask for help anyway, so they're not going to come to us. Sometimes we just have to be a bit tuned in with them as well. Hannah, you're nodding. What are your thoughts about some of the styles, like the insecure, the anxious and the avoidant?
I was just thinking about, you know, the point that Alosa makes about what we pick up, and I think that we can like have quite a high expectations of emotional literacy on adults as well as on children and young people. And I think one of the things about your kind of internal working model, your template for you know, is that no one's going to tell you that. Well, maybe if you've like done a lot of thinking about it, many years of, you know, but you're still going to have areas that you know, you're still going to kind of, it's like falling into the same patterns. So people aren't necessarily going to come and sit down and be like, oh, you know, this is something that I find it very difficult to connect to, particularly children in school. And I think that, you know, sometimes we say like, what's wrong? And actually, if you have a very avoidant way of protecting yourself, really, you might not even be able to you might not know what feelings feel like inside you. You might not know what physical sensations feel like inside you. That's a, you know, that as a protective strategy is, you know, it's better. This situation is so unable to meet my needs that it would be better for me to just not need. Yes. You know, and a kind of closing down in that respect. I was thinking of that as Alosa was speaking.
Yes, that's so true, because it's not always safe to be vulnerable or show your needs or even have needs, or even, like you say, they may not even know feelings, is they maybe that's shut down. And I was just thinking also about, you know, like the anxious child, the ones that present as, you know, quite clingy, but actually nothing can help me kind of presentation. I mean, I think that can be quite challenging for teachers as well, and, you know, for parents or professionals, because it's like, yes, I want comfort, but they don't almost know what they want, and it kind of sends those mixed messages to us as well. And of course, we've also got our own attachment styles that might get triggered. So there's quite a lot going on in the mix as well, and it can get quite interesting. Yeah,
as you're saying then, it's thinking about I'm thinking of staff in school, or even as parents, as you know, particularly that feeling helpless maybe when you're faced with some of that ambivalence, that inconsistency, maybe that feeling like you're not getting through, or they're not telling you how you feel, how they feel. All that kind of could make you as an adult feel quite helpless if you're in a supporting role. You're in a role where you feel you need to be achieving results with children and young people, whether it be emotional well-being results or whether it be academic kind of results. And that in itself can make you feel vulnerable, and then, like you say, Natalie, trigger your kind of maybe ways in which you cope when you're vulnerable, whether it's to be more outward and angry and kind of dismissive, or, you know, avoiding and run away. Well, actually, I can't help that. You're beyond help. You know, you're just too disorganized. I cannot deal with you. I don't, you know, so I think it's quite important to recognize some of that, because it's in being kinder to yourself, you can be kinder to the young person, and in being sort of kinder and aware of the young person, you can be kind of kinder and more aware for yourself. You know, that interplay of just being aware of some of this, how attachment plays its sort of role in this, can not make you feel so helpless. Maybe just normalizing it. Yeah. That, well, actually, sometimes a young person might hate you, and sometimes they might be quite loving you, you know, and it's all a mixture of, you know, a lot of it is a mixture of a muchness. You know, they're not always going to be liking one thing or behaving necessarily in a certain way. It's complex.
Oh, Alosa, it is complex, but I think it's something like that what you said about normalizing. That's so important, because look, stress does not bring out the best in us, you know. It doesn't, does it? And I can't imagine anything more stressful than having 30 kids in a class, you know, and then you're having to kind of meet their individual, you know, you want to meet their individual needs as well. And they're all obviously different places in attachment styles and where they're at school and how they present. And I can't imagine anything more challenging, quite frankly. I would often say I absolutely so respect teachers, but I don't think I could ever hack it or do their job. I think they're amazing. But yeah, and I was just wondering about the normalizing, and also, yeah, just, you know, with the disorganized attachment, that can be quite challenging, can't it? When you're trying to understand, but the young person might not understand what's going on for them either. And if you've got this certain behaviors in a classroom that are just so confusing, how do you reach those kids when you've got a class of 30 kids anyway to sort of deal with? I can't imagine how stressful and challenging that must be.
Yeah. I wonder whether it's helpful for someone, I don't know, maybe you, Natalie, or you, Hannah. I'm just thinking that describing what when we talk about disorganized, what that means. I'm thinking as we're listening to, you know, what that might look like, or where it might stem from, because sometimes we often like to know where do things stem from, because that then helps us, doesn't it, that awareness of how to deal with it, or our empathy for that young person who might display a bit disorganized. I don't know, Hannah, you might have a good way of describing a bit of disorganization.
when we kind of, broadly speaking, I say when we, as in when this profession, rather than the three of us, broadly categorizes attachment, some common things that you'll hear are secure attachment, anxious, ambivalent attachment, and avoidant attachment. And then a fourth category of disorganized attachment, which is kind of, you know, the first three being behavior broadly fell into one of these sort of patterns, and then disorganized being responses were quite unpredictable and or shifted, and we tend to associate that with a caregiving relationship where the source of comfort is also the source of unreliability, is also the source of danger, to put it in a you know, to put it frankly, that someone might meet your needs, but they might also shock you, hurt you. You know, it's a very unpredictable pattern. And so in again, like when we talk about this, it's in such broad terms, and I often think that it's become unhelpfully flattened. It's become like a kind of diagnostic term in a lot of situations, and become pathologizing, rather than, I think, the spirit of certainly of Bowlby's attachment theory was one of going, this is happening to all of us all of the time. This isn't, you know, like, oh, you're a sort of healthy person and you're an unhealthy person. Or, and I think we can feel very impacted when we hear attachment theory discussed in those terms. We suddenly are going like, well, how would I have reacted as a child if I was left alone in a room, or how would my children react? And I think that's, I want to bracket that I think that's unhelpful. But to come back to disorganized attachment, we might, you know, meet, if you know, as teachers, meet children who behave in quite unpredictable ways, where there's a sense of a perceived slight being huge, a sense of so that it can feel quite, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. And I think it's helpful to kind of always bear in mind that what is happening in the live moment has a kind of interplay of my expectations of the world and your expectations of the world. We're constantly picking up little signals from each other, facial expressions, tone of voice, how near or far we hold our bodies to each other. We're constantly checking in, like, you guys are nodding right now, so I feel like I'm saying the right kind of thing. And if I saw one of you, then I would go, oh, I've done something untoward. And, you know, and I might then kind of go back through my back catalogue of, you know, what I do with that feeling of, oh, have I done something that was out of the ordinary? So this is really about an opportunity to, when our kind of engagement with a child, with a person, triggers an unexpected response, unexpected to us, to kind of go, okay, what can I learn about that roadmap? Because maybe that person hasn't expected that I'm going to be someone who is safe, who is predictable, who is who can be trusted to sort of be responsive to their needs.
Oh, Hannah, that's so good. And it's so true, isn't it? Like, so much of our communication is not about words so often. I love that. And I love the fact that as you're talking, I was thinking as well, it's so important for us to be regulated, for us to co-regulate with that child when they're, especially when they're in distress. And even if we don't understand particularly what's triggered it, those moments are gold, aren't they? When we can just come alongside and co-regulate with that child. It might be the first time they've had an adult respond in a safe way where we're just so sensitive and so, you know, seeking to be attuned. But here's the thing, I think everyone can do that. It's not a skill just for therapists. Everyone can offer a child that safe base, that security, that consistency, you know, those basic building blocks. So, and Alosa, I'm just aware you say something that
it was coming. It was.
I love it when Alosa says this.
Well, I don't know. I have no real training in this. It's something I've got from a colleague, and there will be people, you know, if the colleague listening will go, oh, well, I've told you that, and you don't really, you're not really trained in that. I'm trained in that, but I've really picked it up, and it's something through sort of that supervision that we have that feels really sort of key in everybody being able to do this. So it's a circle of security theory. It's an American approach, but it's an approach of building parents and staff's resilience, really, to be able to regulate and provide that co-regulation, because I think it can often come back to looking at that proactiveness. Well, what can I do as the adult in the situation that is going to be helpful here? And what are the intentions almost of you? I mean, we can get lost in our reactions, but if we can take a little bit of a step back and think, well, what do I intend? What is the best outcome? What would I hope for here? And then putting some principles maybe in place. And the circle of security principles that they talk about as an adult is being the bigger, stronger, kinder, wiser person in the relationship. And I think that if we can sort of come from those angles, you've always got a good intention, haven't you? Even if it's hard not to be triggered by some of the things, the way certain children can look at you, or the way, you know, a person might react to you because they're not feeling safe. But if your real intention is to provide safety through some of those principles, you can only do that. You're going to do the best you can, really, in that way. And I think with those bigger, stronger, kinder, wiser, it's something that not just being that for the young person, but being that for yourself as well. So that you, like you were saying, that's the you know, you've got to look after yourself and be able to regulate yourself. So, you know, you've got to be kinder to yourself. If you're in your own mind being that critical, punishing person, for instance, you're not going to be able to regulate yourself to provide that secure relationship to anybody else around you as well. It sounds, when I say it, but you know, really simple, but obviously it's not. It's not always that simple when you're in it, when you're in relationship, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be incredibly challenging, because I'm just thinking, you know, when you're working with children that have, you know, their trust has been broken, or they've just had a, you know, like I'm thinking about kids in care, and, you know, they've just had a really distressing start in life. They may not, why would they trust you because you're the bigger, stronger? You know, they may test, they may test, and just, you know, they need to make sure it's safe. They need to, they might need to test you a few times.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, I think there's something about just so, like you say, regulating and looking after ourselves and being that safe base.
And balance. I sort of missed that aspect as I was just explaining that. Something about the balance, because that approach talks about sort of a child going out on a circle and being able to do the full circle. So almost you as the adult being that secure sort of base, but in order to be secure, you've got to allow the child out into the world, but you've also got to be there for them to come back to you. You know, so it's that being strong enough and reliable enough, and trusting, you know, kinder, and sort of, you can trust that your child, that you can let your child out. But if you don't let them out, and I say out, it could be in terms of things they're interested in, it could be literally going out to school, it could be you know, in a physical aspect, going out to play outdoors, or, you know, or it could be in terms of things that they're particularly interested and keen in, because that part of that develops that strong sense of self for them to be able to make their choices. So it's, as an adult, being able to have that balance between allowing them to make their own choices and be out in the world on their own, and you know, but also being there for them when they need the support and they come back. And I think that's really applies from the small infant crawling, learning to crawl and learning to walk, up to the, you know, teenagers and who are trying to become adults at that stage, coming into the adult world and stepping out. You know, it's, we're allowing you out, but you're also going to come full circle, and we'll be there for you as you come, you know, as you've made your mistakes or whatever, it's fine. I'll be there for you. You'll when you come back on the other end.
Oh, that's so good. I love that model, because I just think it's so practical, and it's easy to just, you know, have it there in your mind. And I know that obviously when you're in stress, we don't always, like, it's not the first thing we go to, but it's so good, isn't it? It's so good just to have that clear model and something really basic and effective. Yeah. Especially in testing times, like we're living, you know, living through at the moment. Sure. And I was just thinking about, you know, how wonderful it is when you do maybe have a rupture in a relationship, when you do have a rupture in that back and forth, and how important it is to do some of that repair work, and how valuable that can be. Like, even in our therapy, you know, sometimes we might have a rupture or an impasse or something, just a little niggle or something, and how, yeah, just how valuable that repairing is. Hannah, do you want to tell us a little bit about that, like how we do some of that wonderful repair work?
And I suppose, I think, you know, when we say rupture, there's a when there's a misattunement, when there's a bit where needs get or expressions sort of miss each other. And the opportunity and repair being the opportunity to like reflect back on that, to kind of go, oh, I think when I did blah blah and you said blah blah and this, you know, I think when that happened, I don't think we really got each other. I think that, you know, maybe when I said that, what you heard was, oh my gosh, that would be, you know, that's really upsetting if that's how it felt to you. So it's modeling. I didn't get your, you know, I didn't get your communication back then, but I'm here to pick it up now, and I would like us to refine each other. And I think, you know, it's not about a situation in which we constantly, you know, meet a child's every, you know, certainly that would be unhelpful. We hope to, you know, help a child to tolerate frustration, help a child to tolerate disappointment or misattunement, but it has to be at the growing edge of bearable. And sometimes, you know, if we miss something, if we drop something, and there's a moment of, oh, there's a damage to that relationship there, to come back to it and say, I want us to like re-find each other, is massive. That's bigger than, you're never going to have a relationship without rupture. But we wouldn't even want that, because the opportunity to repair is invaluable.
Oh, Hannah, I love that. And I think it's so important to bear in mind, this is not about being perfect and always meeting the child's needs. Like you say, that would be awful. And we would be the room for growth and building resilience. So I think it's really important to clarify that. And you've done that wonderfully. Thank you so much. And like you say, such magic moments and such amazing opportunity to model that it's okay sometimes to get it wrong. It's okay to have the humility to say and model that, you know, I'm coming to find you. Let's find each other again. I love what you said there. So rich, so rich. I'm just aware of the time, guys. Any other thoughts? Any other thoughts? And I'm particularly thinking about, you know, yeah, just kids in school as well. Yeah, how might we help teachers? How might we help parents? Yeah, any lasting or thoughts before we go? Any tips? Or, and I'm just thinking about play as well. You know, the magic of that repairing. Sometimes as therapists, we play with kids. We do that play work, and that maybe back and forth. Like someone's going to be so simple, can't it? Like back and forth with a balloon or a. I've played with kids in the room with a balloon back and forth, and it's just and people might think, what are they doing? But it's so important to go back to those early patterns and do some of that repair. But yeah, any lasting thoughts, anything before we go to leave people with?
Yeah, I'd echo what you're saying there, Natalie, about play and creativity can be great ways of and humour. So you're talking about in the school, I think you know, teachers that always bring a bit of humour, even if it's humour in their discipline. I think young people can they can take being told what to do, or being kind of told off, one might say, or being reprimanded for something, but it can often be done in quite a humorous way, and it's often much more taken on and listened to and incorporated and followed when it's done in that way. It's more connecting. So yeah, I think something, you know, play, creativity, humor, spontaneity, all those things help build that attunement that's necessary. But I think I'd go back to that repair as well. I'm so glad Hannah brought it up, because I think that is such a great the modeling aspect. And if we can be the bigger person that comes back and models that kind of, either I got something wrong, or maybe I don't know, did I get something wrong? Did we miss something here? Something misfired in whatever happened, and it could be between teacher and student, parent and child, you know, all sorts of relationships between peers. It's not always a case of who's to blame, or thinking that there's always someone to blame in the situation. It's often just about a a misfiring, something didn't connect quite right, like Hannah was explaining there. And I think that's so important. If that can happen with an adult or with another person in relationship, it only goes to strengthen that relationship moving forward, and just helps with those connections that can build on learning, emotional literacy learning, academic learning, all that kind of growth, like you were saying, Natalie. And then it builds that success, kind of builds success. And then if any other ruptures come up, it's okay, we solved it last time, we can do it again. You know, we can work through this. And sometimes it does mean modeling that, being the bigger person, and looking and really trying to be curious about, where did this misattunement happen? How did that happen? How can we understand this better? And maybe trying to, because often all of us do a sort of gameplay of, you know, it's not me, it's you. You know, I'm not at fault, it's them at fault, and we can get quite stuck in that. So I think that would be a lovely approach to sort of see for growth. Yeah.
I love what you said about be curious. I love that, because it's true, isn't it? Like, we may come across defense mechanisms, we may come across like, you know, if a kid's used to being punished, or, you know, that they're going to be in survival mode. It's like, oh, just, I'm going to get punished, survival mode. And I think it's something about having that, regulation, being curious, that can just so melt some of that as well, and make it safe to explore and talk about, and come to a resolution. I love that, Lo. So thank you for sharing. It's brilliant. Hannah, any thoughts before we go? Anything that you would leave?
I was just struck by, you know, because of obviously, you know, coronavirus, because of the period of lockdown, everything's like that extra bit kind of, you know, everyone's that bit more wobbly. All the, you know, our experience of life feels that much more precarious, that much more unpredictable. So we're all likely to have been really reacquainted with some of our defense mechanisms in this time. And we take that up in different ways, and we take that up in different situations. Like, you know, you might find that when you're with your friend who's incredibly relaxed about, you know, the risk, it is sort of, you know, sharing juice bowls and what have you, you're feeling that bit much more. But when you're with someone who is, you know, staying 5 meters away from you on the street, you take up a more relaxed position. But in terms of like going back to schools at the moment, you might see from, you know, incredibly anxious behavior to very kind of, oh, I don't see what the big deal is, to, you know, you're going to see that in staff teams, you're going to see that in children as well. And that's going to be, you know, it's a reaction to what's going on right now, but it's based on our whole sort of, you know, history of how what we expect of the world, what we expect of relationships. So I think just noticing how that's going on in the room, as you say, you know, being responsive, expecting that there's going to be more wobbles than normal, there's going to be more ruptures than normal. And just like, I think, you know, speaking to schools at the moment, there's just such a lovely response to a very kind of whole child return to the school environment. I'm hearing people say, you know what, we're going to ease back in to the whole, like, you know, learning thing. Right now, it's just about coming together. It's about, you know, and we can support that by using bigger voices, open body language, by really kind of demonstrating, I'm here, I'm engaged, I'm listening to you, I'm ready to respond. And to meet, you know, to not assume that everyone's had the same lockdown. I think it's been wildly different for different families. But to kind of, you know, be there to meet children where they are as they come back into school.
Oh, Hannah, I love that. Meet children where they are. It comes back to that relationship. It comes back to that they're an individual. And like you say, not everyone will have had the same experience. And yeah, it's a wonderful attitude just to have that open holding, ready to meet, ready to, let's just come together. I love that. Let's just come together. Yeah, without all the pressure, because that can come later. But right now it's just coming together, isn't it? That is so great. Ladies, I'm so thankful for your thoughts today. I'm so, just, yeah, it's just such a big subject. And I know we probably have just begun to sort of lay down the little bit of a foundation. But yeah, maybe we can have a follow-up at some point, and just, because I think we could just talk so much longer on this subject. It's one of my favorite subjects. There's so much more we could say. But yeah, just thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you next time. And yeah, stay well, and yeah, look after yourselves. Take care now. Bye.
Thank you.